I think I can count on one hand the number of times that a Warhammer game has felt appropriately Warhammery. And in the case of Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2, I'm pretty sure that the standard has now been set.
My pledge is eternal service.
From Saber Interactive, Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2 is the long awaited sequel to Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 1, which came out all the way back in 2011. That game managed to capture the unbelievably amazing power fantasy of being an 8-foot tall superhuman clad in basically indestructible armor, and dialed it up to 11 to produce a really quite solid third-person action game. Thrusting you back into the boots of Titus, Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2, or I'm going to call it Space Marine 2 from now on, explains where the old bloke has been and what's brought him back to this point in time. Hold it. Hi, Ash here in editing. Just letting you know I'm about to discuss the introduction to the story of Space Marine 2, but apart from that, I have done everything in my power to avoid all the other major plot surprises so that the spoilers are kept at bay. So with that, please enjoy my review and let's get back to it. After the events of the first game, old mate Titus found himself a member of the Death Watch, which are basically the SEAL Team 6 of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, and on a routine mission to try and save a planet that is being infested with horrible bug creatures, he gets cut off from his squad and does his best to complete the mission anyway. Managing to nail the objective, old mate Titus does get overrun with bugs and accepts that his tragic end is probably approaching, before he's rescued by his home team heroes, the Ultramarines. This near-death experience also affords Titus the upgrade to becoming a Space Marine 2.0, or a Primaris Marine for those playing at home, and returns him back to the system he was trying to save to find out that all of his hard work didn't really have that much impact. This kicks off the main narrative of Space Marine 2, with Titus finding himself back in the old rank and file of his previous army and trying to figure out his dynamic after being busted down to a regular lieutenant role instead of his previous leadership position. Now, his time away has also fostered a great deal of resentment from his colleagues, because people are wondering where he's been, and more importantly why he won't tell them all about it. What follows is a tale that feels right at home within the Warhammer 40k mythos, with cackling bad guys, dark secrets from Titus's past coming to haunt him, and people who won't listen to good advice when it's offered. You see, the one thing that separates Titus from his colleagues is the fact that he has an iota of common sense, and he's more than willing to bend the rules if it's going to avoid total annihilation. Titus will then make use of this superpower to see himself through to the end of his tale, with many twists and turns revealing why he keeps getting frustrated with military bureaucracy. But that isn't to say that Titus is only packing common sense, he also has every weapon you could imagine from the Warhammer 40k universe at his fingertips. Be it bolt gun, be it melter gun, be it las fusil, be it plasma gun, be it power sword, be it thunderhammer! Seriously, hell yeah, thunderhammer! Yeah! Sorry? So the game is about combat, and what it does beautifully. Enemies come at you in scores, quite literally filling the screen, and seeing them coming from every angle never gets old. And you, as a Space Marine clad in your ceramite armor, are more than happy to get into the thick of it and purge in the Emperor's name. Where the sequel differs, however, is that there is an added level of complexity to the melee. It doesn't really take much explaining, it's a parry system, and it's based around the idea that some attacks can be parried, and some attacks do need to be dodged. When you parry a basic attack, you can immediately retaliate with your gun, firing from your sidearm and taking out lesser enemies, and mostly staggering larger ones. The bigger attacks that glow red and tell you to get the heck out of the way are the ones you need to be careful of, because even though you are a Space Marine, and your armor is contempt, you too can still fall. Very much to Saber Interactive's credit, the thing that they have been very careful to do is make sure that melee is a very attractive option. When you are fighting the more massive and terrifying enemies in the game, you will be quick to realize that though your ranged weapons are good, your melee damage is no slouch, therefore rewarding you for getting into the thick of it and locking your sword against some of the scariest things that the 41st millennium can throw at you. That's not to say that ranged options aren't worth using. There's a lot of fantastic guns in the game, including some special weapons that you can find lying around in dark corners if you wish to explore. And I promise you will always remember the first time you pulled the trigger on a multi-melter and just vaporized an entire wave of baddies. These larger weapons mostly serve as power-ups in the sense that once you pick them up, you sort of use them until they run dry and then you have to discard them. But that kind of makes sense when you realize just how decimating they can be. There's also a range of grenades for people who like to lob things, and they all have their different specific purposes, including the melter bomb, which is fantastic at blowing up basically everything on screen, including you if you stand too close. The final tool in your Space Marine utility belt is your active ability, and each of the players within the campaign get a unique one. In the case of Big T, he gets access to Righteous Fury, which when activated turns him into an avatar of destruction, and he will restore health as he attacks things. Your colleagues within the campaign, as well as the different classes in the operations mode, all get their own unique button to press. And if you're playing in a cooperative session with your mates, you can start to strategize and think about what ability should be used and when. This cooperative element forms the backbone of the Space Marine 2 experience. The entire campaign, save for the intro, can be played with up to 2 friends. And then there's 6 additional operations missions that can also be played, which serve to tell fun stories that happened off camera as part of the main campaign. And there really is a surprising amount of depth put into the operations missions, with many of their set pieces being just as epic, if not more so, than some of the things you did during the campaign. This, coupled with the 6 classes that are available to play in this mode, means you can really dig down to different levels of progression to keep the replayability coming, meaning that you and your mates are going to be at this for a long time. It also helps that there's a really robust customization option, meaning that you can make your very own special Space Marine Barbie to take into the battlefield. And I guess if you don't care about fashion, there's still plenty of player power to be dug up from leveling up your class and leveling up the different weapons that you use.
We are angels of death.
To speak to visuals, you've been watching the video long enough that you probably understand why I would say that the game looks stunning. The set pieces on offer are spectacular. The cutscenes are absolutely blisteringly good, and even just the most mundane of items feel like they completely nail that grim, dark, futuristic feel. In action, the game runs incredibly well. I never once saw a drop in frames, even when the game was at its most ridiculous. And it really isn't just a case of Saber Interactive being happy to make the game look as nice as possible and then just give up. There's also a lot of really creative things done to make sure that you are constantly saying, wow. One of my favourite encounters wasn't even a massive larger-than-life set-piece moment. It was just simply a section where the lights went out, and I was still holding my glowing power sword. Then the room filled with enemies, and what followed was a combat encounter with just the light of my sword showing me what I was doing. This was clearly done to create one of those water cooler moments where like you say to your mates, hey, you know what I did on the weekend? It was this, and it was awesome. And this is the kind of attitude that is applied to the entire game. Nothing is boring, nothing becomes basic, the game doesn't lull, it just keeps delivering spectacle with a narrative that keeps driving you forward to more and more epic things to happen. It is clear that the endless conflict of the 41st millennium is something well understood by this team, because what they have done here is realize it at a grand scale.
Stragglers, let none escape.
So, to completely divorce myself from my long love of Warhammer, I would still approach Space Marine 2 as an exceptional gaming experience. I mean, the narrative may not be particularly deep, in fact, you'd probably find do not dive signs written around it, but that doesn't stop it from being an absolutely incredible journey to a universe of conflict, pain, and endless peril. And Saber has managed to make it incredibly fun to inhabit, with plenty of reasons to revisit, and most importantly, invite your friends along for the ride. Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2 is a masterclass in understanding your subject matter, delivering not only an incredible game, but a worthy successor to a 13-year-old classic.